Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nikhil Kelshikar.
Hello. I'll also like to invite Ron Fuller up on stage. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining us. It's great to have a nice intro. Ron's going to be my partner in crime, and we are going to share some of this beautiful purple background here for this session today. So thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
So the goal of this session is to walk you through the NSX practical path. I was having some conversations while folks were walking in about what the goal is, right? The goal is that you actually have a clear view of how to go deploy NSX. What does it mean for you? Find some right interesting use cases. With that, let me kick it off. The clicker. All right. Here's the disclaimer, though I have to give a disclaimer to the disclaimer here. Most of what we wanted to present to you today is actually something you can do with the product now, today. We don't want to wait for 2 months, 3 months, 1 year to actually deliver many of these things. So we decidedly prepared certain demos and want to show you things which you can achieve today. But if there is anything, we do have a disclaimer. Objective is to understand how customers are actually deploying NSX, learn the top use cases for NSX, and we want to show you some nice demos where you can look at security, application continuity, and the power of automation of what NSX can bring together. Right? And most importantly, what I want everybody to take away is what does this mean for your business? How does it help transform the business? What does it mean for people, for the culture, and what it can bring? So with the agenda, we're going to talk about NSX today, walk through many of these points. So where are we today? If I can click, all right. The focus for NSX, focus for everything we do and everything you do is really around the applications, right? For a long time, when we look at applications, the goals have been, how can we secure the applications and the data for the users, right? Secondly, application owners also care about how quickly can you deliver the application to the business owners? How quickly can you turn on new services, the agility around it? And last but not the least, it has been around how can you build a highly available, resilient infrastructure where you can have business continuance for all your applications. Now, these three goals have been the goals for a long amount of, forever. We have been able to look at how we deliver to these goals by building out an enterprise architecture which meets and defines those needs. But as we look at where things are going, where applications continue to change, many things around our enterprise architecture itself is changing. For example, let's take a look at security. We are seeing massive changes in the threat landscape. Where we were looking at a perimeter-bound security where everything was secure, and you could actually have a perimeter of firewalls, you can't do that anymore because attacks have become more and more sophisticated. It is very hard to discern between a malicious actor and a legitimate user, right? It's hard to figure out how the data is being exfiltrated. These threats are not just coming from outside intermittently, but they're persistently happening and sitting right within that infrastructure. Secondly, with the weaponization of cyberspace, right, where a device to everything can basically attack consistently, continuously trying to steal data, it really requires a rethinking of how you secure this application. Microsegmentation is one way. Leveraging microsegmentation and the analytics you can get from it to be able to provide forensic view into what is happening with their application is one other technique, right? And there are a few of these. So that's on security. Things are changing. Secondly, the application architecture itself is undergoing a massive change. From going from a client-server 3-tier model, we are seeing more and more a disaggregated application model, where you have containerization or microservices being deployed everywhere, or applications running purely as a PaaS itself. That has a big impact to the application. And then the infrastructure is changing around whether you're running, where we were planning to provide security, load balancing, all of these services around a particularly defined hardware stack, you can't depend on that anymore. Things are becoming more converged, with hyperconverged infrastructure, but more importantly, applications can run anywhere from on-prem to the public cloud itself. So what I'm going to tell you is NSX is the answer, as you probably guessed. So as new app owners build an application, they're fundamentally building it to be infrastructure independent. So you can run it as a microservice running on-prem or in the cloud. With NSX, you can take security and various services and wrap it around a virtual machine, a container, a microservice, make it available as a YAML file, and deploy it such that it runs across any hypervisor, across any cloud. Now, people who have been coming to VMware for the past few years have probably heard some of this from us. Today, if you saw some of the announcements and where we are, today we are truly at a point where we can show how this can happen. We can actually run, and I'm going to show you a demo of what we have today, of, if time permits actually, of how you can actually describe a YAML file, run NSX using Kubernetes, and actually get the same benefit. Right? So you can do this today. This is at the core of what digital transformation is. And fundamentally, this is the promise of what NSX brings. And this is why NSX, it's almost, as I said earlier, it's imperative that we actually start looking at this. So let's talk about why customers are deploying NSX. NSX customer momentum has been growing exponentially. Right? We have had 100% year-on-year growth. Very large number of customers are deploying it. We are seeing over 2 new deployments per day, and that number keeps going up. And based on these deployments, one of the things we learned, and I was having a conversation earlier on with a customer, where you can start with one use case, right? The use case which gives you the most benefit. I'm going to share a few with you today, right? And from there, what we have seen is over time, once you are able to operationalize it, once you're able to build practices around it, naturally, customers are actually growing and expanding those use cases into other areas because you can start seeing benefits to the business itself. A big part of this is the community, is all of you. Right? Many of you are going through the certification path. We have almost 8,000 plus people who are actually certified with NSX, and that number continues to grow. So that is just as important to us in being able to build that community itself. NSX is being deployed across many verticals, across all different sizes of businesses, right? From service provider, like a vCloud Air network partner, like a Rackspace, to a transportation company, like Amadeus or a Marriott, to technology companies, public sector, right? Many of these customers are deploying NSX for various different use cases. So what are those use cases looking like? The top 3 use cases are about securing your infrastructure, security, being able to automate all functions of that security and the various services, and to be able to drive app continuity. We are going to walk through each of these 3 use cases in a little bit more detail and show you some demos. But to kick it off, with security, it's about being able to provide microsegmentation for your workloads, right? And that evolves into more advanced use cases around VDI or around how you build compliance DMZs for PCI or HIPAA, right? Automation is about using a cloud management platform, but to be honest, what we are going to show you is actually a much simpler way to start. You can run PowerShell to actually automate how that application infrastructure gets deployed, how NSX could get deployed. And then you can extend with DR and app continuity use cases to help solve your migration challenges, right? You want to migrate from one data center to another one, or one data center to a colo, or to a public cloud provider like a SoftLayer, or in the future, VMware Cloud. You can achieve all of that, leveraging the key components which we bring to the table. So the next piece of what we wanted to cover was getting started with NSX. I'm going to pass it on to my partner in crime here, Ron, to talk us through what that looks like.
Perfect. Thank you. So I apologize ahead of time. I'm moving a little slow. I did a Spartan race on Saturday, so I'm limping around doing the Spartan shuffle. I'm sore. But when we start talking about getting started with NSX and really where our customers start to deploy it, really it becomes very, very easy to use. How many of you have ever deployed NSX? Just quickly show of hands. Quite a few, right? So certainly it's an OVA, right? Step 1, deploy the OVA and register it with your with the vCenter in the environment, and that starts to allow us to start to take advantage of some of the firewall policy that's inherent to NSX. And that can all be done very, very quickly with no changes to your existing infrastructure, right? And that in and of itself is a pretty great capability within the platform. To start taking that next step and leveraging network virtualization, you just simply deploy the controllers, right? And the controllers are certainly an important part of the architecture, and we're not going to get into the details of how controllers work and why and everything, but certainly know that they're there and that they're part of the network virtualization componentry. But we've got 3 of them that we deploy for high availability. And then we simplify the process to prepare your clusters, right? So how many of you have ever had to copy VIBs from one location to another or integrate them into an existing vendor-supplied ISO or things of that nature, right? It can be a bit of a challenge. We heard that from our customers, and one of the things that we did with NSX is build in and automate the deployment of those VIBs out to the hosts that are members of a cluster to make your life easier to deploy NSX. So literally, it's a matter of going into the NSX Manager, clicking on the cluster and telling it, prepare this cluster. And it pushes the VIBs out there for you automatically. And then finally, we just configure and deploy the edge services gateways. And the edge services gateways, for those who might not be that familiar with the nomenclature that we use inside of NSX, is simply just a virtual machine that's a router that provides the connectivity between the physical world, right, your existing infrastructure, and the virtualized NSX environment. And it runs OSPF, it can run BGP, depending on your religion, static routing might be a routing protocol. I'm on the side of that's not a routing protocol, that's just a configuration option, but to each his own. So but with that, you're able to deploy NSX and have it up and operational. You're able to define security policy, leveraging vCenter objects. You're also able to do all the network virtualization functions. And for most of our customers, the way that they start off with this is by going through the GUI, going through the user interface, going into vCenter and clicking on all the appropriate boxes to make this a reality. One of the things that's really nice about NSX, and we kind of have a bit of a preview to some of the automation, is we've got a demo that we're getting ready to play. If we can switch over to the second screen, please, that will show how we can leverage or deploy NSX from a simple script using a technology called Power NSX to be able to do this. So I'll blow this up so it's full screen. But what's happening during this process, this is a script that you can go download right now off of GitHub. This is nothing magical, mystical that's hidden and kept away. We'll pull up the script itself. You can see you just plug in the variables, things that are relevant to you and your specific environment, the appropriate IP addresses, passwords, licensing, things of that nature, whatever your naming standard is. But what we'll see here is that in roughly 3 minutes or so, we will have deployed the NSX OVA, linked it to your vCenter, licensed it, gone through, created those controllers, configured VXLAN across the environment, deployed the VIBs out to some hosts to do that host preparation function that we talked about, start to configure some logical networks, connect them to the distributed logical router that's part of NSX, also connect that into the edge services gateway, and have that all be automated. And this isn't just something we do just for demo purposes here in VMworld. This is something we do in customer environments all the time. This is a really powerful example of how we can leverage that automation and really how easy it is to deploy NSX to get it up and started day one, right? You don't have to go through the entire GUI unless you really want to, and you can go through and do this. And you can see we're creating logical switches, configuring the distributed logical router, we're setting the default gateways, the default routes, enabling load balancing even, right? We're deploying applications. This is automation at its core. And if you're like me, I'm not very much of a programmer, so this is easy automation, this is easy programming, right? This is a Power NSX script that you can run. We've configured OSPF, right? So you get the idea. It goes through and it will finish the deployment, and we're in good shape. So it's very, very simple to do and easy to deploy from that perspective. So if we could switch back to the main screen, please, to the main laptop. All right, so we just went through the deployment. Yep. There we go. All right, so that Power NSX is another session you can actually go catch tomorrow. We are going to go through a lot of these automation options and how you can do this for NSX
I forgot the name. It was on the previous slide, but let's keep going. So that's another good example of how you can. And there are a few other sessions which cover automation of NSX. That's how easy it is to deploy, right? You can also get it as in the form of things like VMware Cloud Foundation and others which also automate a lot of the build around NSX. Right? So this is one starting point. Let's talk about security. What we are doing with security, our focus here is to be able to provide security for end users, the user devices, and how they're actually accessing this data all the way into the data center, right? What we want to do is to be able to establish and maintain a least privileged security mode in the environment. So when an end user is coming off of their virtual desktop, that desktop has very specific access to the applications and the data they need based on who they are. When it comes to devices protected by AirWatch, we can also add context around where they are. What is the posture of that device? What is the version of that operating system? And be able to apply those security controls around applications, the data, whether it is network-based security, whether it is compute-based security, we want to be able to do that. So that's, in a big picture, what our security focus is. To be able to do that, we have a lot of security capabilities and features, right? I talked about the three things we do around security. Number one is microsegmentation, being able to have a very fine-grained perimeter around a VM, a container, or any workload. To be able to do microsegmentation, out of many features which NSX has, the key features are using the distributed firewall to provide inter and intra-zone segmentation, where you can use rules based on IPs, MACs, VM attributes, and even external context which can be provided by like an agent, like an AirWatch, or external context which can be provided by a third party. When it comes to VDI, we can provide VDI security with NSX distributed firewall based on even Active Directory credentials, the groups, and the usernames, right? We can use guest introspection for protection from antivirus and different malware, which is another big popular use case for NSX. Or you can build DMZs for compliance zones using third party such as a Palo Alto, a Checkpoint, Fortinet, and so on and so forth for IPS-IDS integration. So all of these security features are actually available within NSX, and the possibilities are really endless. Ron, do you want to walk us through how can you go ahead and get started with security?
Absolutely. So this is one of the big challenges a lot of customers face when they start looking at, well, how do I get started with microsegmentation? Because to get to that true zero trust policy model requires quite a bit of understanding about how your applications work, who they talk to, and how they behave and all that type of stuff, right? So there's a couple tools that we see customers being very successful with their deployments by using. One of them is called VRNI, vRealize Network Insight. And what we do is we have customers deploy VRNI to be able to start to kind of get a baseline of their existing environment, understand what are the east-west flows that are in my environment. A lot of customers understand their north-south flows, right? What comes in the data center, what leaves the data center, but what happens inside the data center, much like Las Vegas, stays in Las Vegas, right? they need to understand, though, what happens inside the data center. VRNI gives them that visibility, right? It leverages NetFlow on the distributed virtual switch to be able to start to collect that information and then put it into an easily reportable graphic representation so that they can run reports and get data out of it. Definitely installing NSX comes into play to be able to start to get that security posture ready, being able to get the distributed firewall put out there. You don't need to change your existing environment. Nothing changes on your physical network. Nothing changes in your existing firewall, but you're preparing the environment, getting ready to take advantage of NSX. And then you start to deploy those distributed firewall rules. And where we see most customers start with that distributed firewall rule set, they'll start with their core services. Right, there are things that are in everybody's data center that everybody needs to access. DNS, syslog, NTP, Active Directory, right? The list goes on and on, right? There's those core infrastructure services that everybody uses. So we'll start with building out firewall policy to allow all of our guests to be able to access those services as appropriate, right? Maybe our Linux machines don't need to access Active Directory and vice versa. I don't need my Linux machines or my Windows machines to access Yellow Pages or something if I'm using that still. So I can build that foundational rule set and policy in my infrastructure, and I can use a new tool that we've got built into NSX called Application Rule Manager, ARM. Has anybody had an opportunity to play with our ARM at all? Couple. A couple people have. Good. So what we've done with ARM is to build a platform that's part of NSX to allow customers to start to select virtual machines, have it run some traffic analysis on it to understand what its workflows are, and then be able to automate and simplify the process of being able to deploy those rule sets to the distributed firewall. Right, we're trying to make everybody's life easier. And actually, that's the demo that we're going to go into here in just a few moments to deploy or to leverage ARM to look at an existing application and start to lock it down, right? And then certainly microsegment monitor, it becomes a life cycle, right? It's not hey, I set my firewall once, high fives all around, good job, guys, we're done, everybody go home. The reality is it's security, right? So there's a constant monitoring and managing and maintaining it. And certainly you've never had an application change its port numbers or anything like that during an upgrade, right? That just doesn't happen. And if it does, it's certainly clearly communicated ahead of time so that you're well prepared and not getting that call in the middle of the night on Saturday, hey, we upgraded our main application and now it's broken. It's a network problem. Nobody's ever had that happen? You guys are living the good life. So if we can switch over to the other screen, there we go, thank you. We're going to log into our environment, and this is the NSX GUI. For those of you who haven't seen it, we're looking at the firewall aspect of it. We've got our generic firewall policy configured that has the basic rule set that we've deployed. And in this environment, it's pretty wide open, right? But what we're going to do is we're going to leverage Application Rule Manager here under Flow Monitoring, Application Rule Manager. We're going to start a new session, and we're going to very creatively name it VMworld. And we're going to tell it, I want to only see my O1A servers. So there's my app, my database, my web servers. We're going to select them. Maybe. There we go. And put them over here and tell it to go ahead and start monitoring the traffic. This is leveraging the existing infrastructure inside of NSX. This is not doing anything with NetFlow or anything else, right? This is just because the distributed firewall is there. We'll switch screens, not trying to give you vertigo or anything by switching screens, but we want to go out and launch our web application so we can generate some traffic and make sure that we're going to pick up some data. I also have some ping running in the background because, what's the best network monitoring tool known to mankind? Ping, right? That's what everybody starts with. So we've got some traffic going, and in the meantime, ARM is running in the background, and what we'll see is that it'll start to populate these flows based on the information that it sees traversing the network. And let's start a new tab just for kicks and grins. So this will continuously sit here and monitor this traffic, right? So you don't have to babysit the screen. You don't have to sit here forever. You can click away from it, and it still continues to run in the background, monitoring that data and then displaying the flows. And you gotta love doing live demos, right? But what will end up happening, and we'll see it here just briefly, is that it will start to populate these fields with some of the flow data, and we'll be able to stop the collection, do some quick analysis on it, and push those rule sets out to the firewall, all from this GUI, right? So it'll start to build out this representation of the data. There we go. All right, so there's our flows. Just as all despair was starting to settle in, right? Okay, so we're going to do a quick analysis on this, and then we'll go through and look at the traffic that it collected, the flows, and start to come up with some logical matching, right? I saw this source talking to this destination on this TCP, UDP, ICMP port, whatever floats your boat, or whatever protocols are actually being used. And what it will do is it will display a list of those flows kind of collated down here. So typically you let this run for longer than a few minutes, right? You want to be comprehensive on your environment and understand the flows that are happening. Maybe they're only happening once a day, right? Maybe it's a batch upload to a legacy system or something along those lines, right? There's lots of interesting nuances that you find when you actually start to go looking in your infrastructure. But what we're going to do is create a firewall rule based on this. So I highlighted all of them, and again, we'll give it another name, equally creative, called VMworld. And what we can see, though, we've got our source and destinations, and some of these we understand the system's name, right, the virtual machine's name. Some of them we just understand its IP address, and that's fine. We see we've got things like ICMP echo. Actually, you know what? I don't really want to allow ICMP echo because I want to develop a very rigorous zero trust policy. I'm going to remove that. And then we've got our applied to field, which is where this firewall policy will be applied, and we're going to allow it. We could either block or reject it. Go ahead and apply it. And what will happen is that we've now created this list of firewall policy. Now, this looks a lot like the screen that we saw earlier, right, which is the NSX distributed firewall screen. So what do you think we can do from here? We're going to publish this out to the firewall rule set, and again, give it a really creative name. And now it's published. What we can do is we can go over here and we can see that I now have this new firewall policy that's been published here, right, with our appropriate rule set. So that's how easy it is to be able to start to create firewall policy to microsegment your infrastructure without having to sit there and sort through a ton of data to find the proverbial needle in the haystack, right? This becomes very easy, and guess what? It's all automatable, right? So this is something that can be done simply and easily day in and day out. So yeah, that's pretty slick. So in our application, obviously, it still works. Well, not obviously. I'll show you. It still works. Okay. So if we switch back to the main screen, so that's ARM in a nutshell, right? Pretty straightforward. And there's a much deeper dive session on it Wednesday at 3:30 that they'll spend the whole time going through best practices and pros and cons and things of that nature. So good information to check out. Part of what we just looked at was that security in depth that Nikhil mentioned earlier, right? Where we've got a lot of different ways we can collect data, right? We've got things like being able to select context on things like vCenter objects, or open source or container information. We have in-guest monitoring capabilities that are available to us, things that let us see what's happening inside of the actual workloads themselves, down to the file and binary level, or the process and executable, and the socket level. And then obviously the network layer, which we just showed with ARM, allows us to be able to do things like match on the layer 4 or 5 tuple, or even the application and user ID if you look at some of the other capabilities. All this ties into other solutions to be able to provide even more context and more opportunity to provide security in depth in our environment. Things like tying it into AirWatch for mobile devices, right? I work with a large police force on the east coast of the country that leverages AirWatch and NSX to secure their patrol units, right? So this is a pretty common use case. Certainly app defense. Anybody watch the general session this morning? Right? We talked about app defense in there. That's also another contextual tie-in for NSX. And then it's not just VMware products, but also we've got a rich partner ecosystem that we can leverage for anything from antivirus to data loss prevention to NGFW and IDS IPS, right? So all of this combined together can create a very comprehensive and powerful solution for security inside of your data center, and being able to make it easy to manage and maintain so that it's not necessarily a science fair project, right? Nobody wants to make their life harder day in and day out. The whole goal is, how do I secure my infrastructure in this digital age with the cyber warfare and everything else that's happening? And that's what NSX really provides, that platform for me to be able to do. I can do the service chaining in this implementation in very, very granular detail and get a much better security posture and make it easier to manage across the board. I'll turn it back over to Nikhil to shift. Oh, I'm sorry, one more slide. This is an important one, especially I work in the SLED space, so state, local education, any of our government customers, they ask about these questions all the time. What kind of firewall certifications do we have? Certainly common criteria and FIPS are key on everybody's mind. Our enterprise customers, as well as our our SLED customers also care about various compliance certifications, whether it's PCI, NERC and SIP, FedRAMP, HIPAA, DISA, you name it. We have been working for the last 3 years very diligently to make sure that our product can be used to help provide these types of compliance, reporting, and security architectures that customers are looking for to be able to meet their business objectives across the board.
Thank you, Ron. So one of the things which Ron, I think, skipped in the interest of time was to walk through, like we showed the ARM demo, right? The next part, if we get time, we can probably show it to you. But where we are going to take this is in a very interesting direction. You saw how we actually looked at how those firewall rules were, right? We had to go and create those firewall rules. Very soon, we are going to go and automatically understand as a part of the analysis what those firewall rules should be and give you a set of firewall rules which can automatically be published, right? So we'll automatically match all the groupings of who the VMs are, everybody, and create a set of firewall rules which are ready to go. It's going to really simplify how easy it will be, right? Simplify microsegmentation. Today, doing microsegmentation, one of the things we keep hearing, it just takes a little bit more planning, right? You have to do some log analysis, or you have to do know what your application is. Here, you can point this to an existing brownfield infrastructure, use Verny, use application rule manager, and have a set of rules which can actually be used as a template and deployed to that particular application. How cool is that? Is it? All right, now people are waking up. All right, let's talk about NSX for application continuity, right? This is another big use case where one of the big things is when we are trying to do disaster recovery today, what are the things you need to do? You need to stretch the network, right? You can do that with MPLS, OTV, EVPN, a few choices. Next, you have to make sure that you are able to keep your security, your load balancer, your services, all of this in sync. With NSX, we can actually simplify that significantly. Not only can we stretch the network across multiple data centers, across vCenters, we can simply take those firewall rules. Because they're already in software, you can codify them, and you can basically read the config, and you can actually have them available on the other side. On your DR side, you can take services, you can have them available at the DR side. We have built features like cross vCenter NSX. As a part of cross vCenter NSX, such as universal logical switches, universal firewall rules, we are actually adding a lot of capabilities around active DR, tag synchronization, so you can still use many of those contextual things to be able to apply that security, drastically simplifying disaster recovery, right? We have had quite a bit of success, and you are going to look at, there are sessions on Thursday, NET 1190 and 1191 and 1192 by Humair Ahmed, which walks through those examples. Another big use case is simply to build active-active data centers. Typically, where you need those active-active data centers is where you're trying to do like data centers moves or migrations. You can have two NSX running with logical switches which are active-active. You can do egress routing. You can do a lot of interesting tricks around here. And many customers are actually leveraging that. And the third and the most exciting one is around cross-cloud. You heard about VMware Cloud on AWS, where you can bring up an entire SDDC in the cloud, or with like SoftLayer, for example, you can IBM Bluemix, where you can bring the same thing up. You can extend your on-prem NSX to that public cloud using Layer 2 VPN, Layer 3 VPN for cloud onboarding. What we are going to show you in the demo is how you can actually use that to be able to do DR as well. So a lot of great features around application continuity as a part of NSX. So here's an example of a customer, Marriott, right? What they were able to do is they were using IBM to be able to be their cloud provider, and they can actually build those apps, deploy it on-prem, deploy it in the cloud, make it extremely seamless, right? To be able to provide a very productive IT team, can actually create new applications and deploy them. I'll pass it back to Ron to walk us through a demo and walk us through how you can get started with NSX app continuity.
Awesome. Ron. Thank you. So much like we saw earlier, step one is deploy NSX, right? This is an NSX session. Guess what? We're going to be using NSX to help simplify and achieve our disaster recovery goals. So we're going to install deploy NSX on both the primary and the secondary sites, and deploy the various components, leveraging the host preparation function that we talked about earlier, right? Then we're going to deploy what we call universal controllers. We haven't really dug into depth on this. There are certainly sessions here that go into a lot of detail on the cross vCenter capabilities inside of NSX, but universal controllers are part of that mix, right? So you deploy those just like you did the regular controllers. There's a group of 3, a cluster of 3 for high availability. And then we'll deploy the secondary NSX manager and register them with each other, right? So that the primary knows about the secondary and they can start to synchronize information back and forth. And that information is things like network information, firewall information, things of that nature, right? So we establish that cross vCenter connectivity, and then we'll start to create the various universal objects, right? And all of these are the same constructs that we have in traditional kind of single site NSX. They just have universal in front of the name, right? So things like universal logical switches, logical routers, universal firewall rules and policies. And one of the things that Nikhil hinted at that we can do, and this is a pretty cool thing, right? So old networking guy, and unfortunately it kind of hurts to say I'm an old networking guy because I don't think I'm old, but my kids let me know I'm old. But we can do a technology called local egress, where I can have this awareness inside of my network to say, this traffic came from data center B, it needs to leave the network in data center B and not hairpin back across the data center interconnect to egress out the primary data center A or whatever, right? This is a big problem. When you start talking to your networking team about active data centers, they throw out tons of acronyms about, well, I got to worry about asymmetric routing and stateful services and VPLS and DCI, and you make a whole career out of it, right? That's how people like me had a job for a long time. It's good stuff. But with local egress, we can help optimize that flow, right? So that traffic leaves the data center that it's coming from and simplifies and better utilizes the network. That's all in those universal constructs. And then finally, we'll deploy some more edge services gateways, much like we did earlier. Those are the virtual machines that are the on-ramp and off-ramp between the physical and the virtual world. So let's take a look at this demo. If we can switch over to the secondary monitor, please. All right, we will get out of that. We'll take a look at this Site Recovery Manager capability to SoftLayer, right? So this is a recorded demo that talks about the ability to be able to do this SRM failover between multiple data centers, right? And in this case, we've got one in someplace in Washington. I don't even know how to say it, right? Wenatchee, Washington, and San Jose in the IBM SoftLayer cloud, right? So if you're from that part of Washington, I apologize for butchering the name, but the idea is that I don't have to have the same coexistence or the same distance limitations that I traditionally have to have. I can leverage a layer 2 VPN, leveraging NSX edge services gateways, doing layer 2 VPN functionality to be able to connect these infrastructures. And we see we've got ESX host down at the bottom and using Site Recovery Manager and vSphere replication services to keep the data in sync, right? That's always a critical part of any kind of disaster recovery or HA type of model is, well, I can build the networks and the security policies and stuff, but if the data's not there, what good is it, right? So certainly vSphere replication services come into play with this. In this demo, what we'll do is those 3 critical VMO 10203 that are on the left-hand side, the kind of the grayish ones in the middle, will be failed over to the SoftLayer cloud. And what we'll do is we'll leverage SRM, Site Recovery Manager, to be able to do this. They're on the same IP subnet, so they don't need to change their IP addresses, right? And when they move over, we'll see that it'll be a disaster recovery exercise, which means that the VMs will have, in essence, been powered down, and they're booting up in the other data center, right? And we'll go in and we'll see this all through the GUI right here. So I mentioned we're using Site Recovery Manager, nothing magical or mystical. This is all stuff that's available. How many of you have SRM in your environment today? It's pretty cool stuff, isn't it? I think. So certainly, the ability to be able to define this policy, these are my critical VMs, and I want to be able to protect them and have them fail over. In this environment, we're using solid state disk, so our RPO is very low, 5 minutes, right? So we were able to recover this environment. This is our critical infrastructure, right? So what we'll do is we will go in and we'll tell it we want to to do the failover, we've got a couple different options. If you've not used SRM before, we can do a planned migration, which is what a lot of our customers do, kind of a more graceful migration. Quiescing the disks and powering things off and moving them over. The reality is that never happens on the weekends, right? Disasters happen any time of the day. So we'll use a disaster recovery, the second option here, and initiate that disaster recovery failover, which pretty much pulls the carpet out from under those critical VMs, right? And tell it to reinstantiate them and reboot them over in the recovery site. So when that happens, what we'll see is obvious loss of connectivity, right? So we'll go ahead and fire that off. And as I mentioned earlier, right, what's the best networking monitoring tool out there? Ping. So we're going to log into another machine and start some pings. And what we'll see is kind of a hint we can see from the round trip time over on the left-hand side. You might not be able to see it, but it's in here, that they're in the 70 milliseconds, maybe 2,000 milliseconds for some of them range, and then they stop. Guess what happened? That disaster has just happened. Those machines are no longer available. Now the process is that they're being booted up in the soft layer data center. They're going to maintain their IP addresses, right? Which is nice. How many of you have ever had to do a disaster recovery plan where you're changing IP addresses? It makes you just want to pull your hair out, right? It's an exercise in frustration. But we can see that we still don't have those machines. They're in the process of being booted up in the secondary site, but they'll come back here in just a few moments, and you'll see, there we go, they're starting to come alive, right? We're getting destination host unreachable, and now they're starting to be, their IP stack at least is loaded. I'm sure now the databases and whatever critical apps are in the process of spawning and starting. But now we can see that they're in the soft layer data center because the ping response times are, sub-millisecond, right? So they've moved to the secondary site, and we've been able to recover them. So NSX made that simpler for us by providing that IP connectivity between the two of them and being able to stretch those network segments across the board. And the whole point really was that we wanted to show that it's not just vSphere on AWS like we announced earlier today, but also these existing environments like SoftLayer that allows us to be able to drive this capability into our customer environments as well. And certainly, all you got to do is turn on the news today and realize the importance of disaster recovery for almost anybody's planning, right? So, heaven help the people in Houston, they're going to need it, but it's definitely a very top of mind topic for a lot of customers, right? It's no joke, and it's something that's a challenge. It's so easy to say, but now it's also becoming much, much easier to do, right? So with that, I will, if we switch back to the primary projector, please, I'll turn it back over to Nikhil.
All right.
So we were able to take advantage of SoftLayer.
Yeah. So when you look at this, what Ron just showed you was how we can do this with layer 2 VPN, right? You can have a layer 2 VPN client on either side. You can build this. You'll see this work very similarly in the VMware Cloud or AWS implementation as well. Additionally, NSX also has this ability where you can actually stretch these universal distributed, universal logical switches, universal logical routers, and universal firewall rules, where you can create those things where both the NSX managers on either side, there's a primary and a secondary relationship with them, and you can get some of the same capabilities and then some as you start operating in that mode as well, right? So a lot more. Go to some of the other sessions like 1191 and 1192, where you'll be able to see some of these capabilities in action. Next, I wanted to walk through was NSX for automation. When we look at automation, there again, as back to the same three use cases. The biggest one is around IT automating IT. Typically, there are many, many tasks which administrators do on a regular basis, which is, hey, I want to deploy a new application. Then it kicks off something for the security team around creating those security rules. It kicks off a ticket to the load balancing team around provisioning those VIPs. And many of these tasks get pipelined, and they just take time as you go through all those stages. Using automation and workflows, you can actually have a much simpler, faster way to get through these approved tasks. You can use a cloud management platform like a vRealize Automation to deploy these, or you can also use other things, as we are going to show you, like the same PowerShell type of a scripting methodology to create many day 2 tasks what you're going to see, which Ron's going to walk through, is, hey, I want to be able to change my firewall rules. I want to change my policy, how easy it is to use automation to be able to do those tasks. These are tasks where IT can simply simplify those workflows on an ongoing basis. The next piece is around developer cloud. There are many customers like Nike, like Amadeus, who are using VMware integrated OpenStack to deploy workloads onto this environment, right? They're using containers, they're making container deployments running within vSphere VMs. That is another use case. The next one is around which many of our service providers use for building multi-tenant environments using vCloud Director or OpenStack. So there are lots of different automation use cases where NSX comes into play. This is an example of the customer Amadeus where I just mentioned. The main takeaway from this comment is that they don't really care what automation tool you use. The whole point of using automation is to be able to move fast, take those workflows and be able to create and automate them so you can deploy them faster, right? You're less error prone, you're faster to getting the outcome you need. And the main use case around this was building a developer cloud for their own developers. The way you can automate NSX is through these three things. You can use the UI, where you have a very strict workflow-based technique where you say, okay, I want to create a logical switch, I want to attach those VMs to the logical switch, I want to connect them to a distributed router, I want to create firewall rules. It's a stricter workflow. You can use the API where you can jump out of that workflow and you can do whatever you want to do. You can do regular expressions and things like that. It's much more flexible if you're comfortable with that. And to be honest, one of the things you might want to learn at this VMworld is it's actually not very hard to use the API. You don't need to be a programmer. You just need to use the right tools with NSX. And the third way is to use a cloud management platform like an OpenStack or a VRA. So let me turn it over to Ron to walk us through how you can use automation using security rule creation for PowerShell. This is one example. And if we can turn it over to the second monitor, please.
Thank you. So in this one, what we're going to see, when we switch over to the second monitor, there we go, thank you, is kind of a day two life cycle, right? Being able to see what kind of a firewall configuration is in place. In this case, we'll start off with some IP sets and being able to add different pieces to them, right? So we're using Power NSX, right? PowerShell commands to go out and figure out which IP addresses are members of this particular IP set, and then being able to start to add additional members to them, right? So now in this case, the very bottom, and this might be a little tough to see, but you can see we've added an entire range of addresses, right, to the firewall policy. That all happened just through that one API call that we did through Power NSX. As opposed to going into the GUI and clicking around and typing that all in. So when we start talking about this day two functionality, that's a common task, right? Hey, I just set up a new site, it needs to be added to the firewall policy. Can you add it? Absolutely. Let's make it a task and boom, we're done and let's all go home, right? So there's lots of ways to solve these problems. And so now we can still verify that, hey, that's been added. Oh, well, you know what? I didn't really want to have the whole 10.000/8, because that's a pretty big block of addresses, added to that firewall policy, I can remove it, right? So you start to see the idea of what we're doing here. We're leveraging Power NSX to be able to manipulate these firewall policies without having to touch the UI at all, right? So we can start to simplify our workflows day in and day out, right? So we're also able to continue to remove additional members. We can then start to do things like, here we go, this is a good one. Being able to leverage regular expressions to be able to define what type of firewall policy we're using, whether it's a universal policy, and being able to configure the IP addresses for it, and constantly doing checks and balances, right? Let's verify that the information I'm pulling is what I expect to see, and that it's taking place. In this case, we're creating a firewall policy called Bookstore Universal. Right, so this, one of our applications is the virtual bookstore, and being able to start to build out these VIPs, right? So now we start to be able to configure our load balancing policy as well. So it's not just firewall policy in the strict sense of traditional, 5-tuple firewall policy, but now we can also do these same functions to automate things like adding VIPs to our load balancers and things of that nature. And this continues to go. So we won't belabor every one of these because there's a ton of good information in this demo. But you can see that there is a lot of capability that we can do through Power NSX, right? And for a lot of our customers, their journey begins with, I'm going to go into the GUI and click around and do things as I understand the workflow. But as they get more mature and more comfortable and more relying on the technology, they're able to say, you know what? I can start to automate a lot of these things and make my life easier day in and day out and not have to go through the potential for somebody clicking on the wrong thing and, oops, did I just trash my firewall policy? I hope not, right? Start to simplify that and also be able to make it more reactive based on conditions in the environment as well, right? Being able to query, have it fill in variables and populate the fields for you. So very, very powerful tool that, as Nikhil mentioned, isn't some huge programming undertaking that you need to become. I don't need to learn C++ or any kind of advanced firewall policy or advanced programming language to be able to take advantage of this. Shut the window that had the PowerShell script. I was going to pull it up, but I guess not. So we'll switch back to the other screen. But you can see that this becomes a pretty easy thing to use.
So let me walk quickly through what's next for NSX and use. Where are we going? Our vision is to be able to provide NSX not just around those vSphere workloads, but around multiple different workloads, right? We have NSX for vSphere. We have NSXT, which leverages and runs on KVM. We talked about end users and how we're able to secure those. One of the things we're announcing at this show is the ability to secure new app frameworks, whether it is Kubernetes or whether it is PCF, right? Be able to provide security right down to that container level. And we also heard this morning about how we are able to secure workloads running within the cloud, whether it is VMware Cloud on AWS and others. And then customers are using NSX for being able to secure their branches as well. In the few 8 minutes I have, I want to walk you through a quick demo of how we can secure for Kubernetes. This is pretty interesting, and just for kicks, I might run this demo as well. So here's an example of modernizing an application with Kubernetes. What the administrator does is basically have a layer 3 routing set up from your infrastructure, and then the application owner basically can drive the app config, where they deploy Kubernetes pods, whether it is for Redis, whether it's for Django, is what we're going to see. And automatically these pods are deployed, the logical router comes up, and it gets hooked up straight to your layer 3 boundary, and it can advertise and then go. So let's take a look at this demo. This was covered in much more detail in NET3282BU. Actually, can you go back to the PowerPoint itself, because the demo is embedded. This session is done. It was the first session this morning from a scheduling perspective, so maybe you can go back and take a look at it. All right. So if can you go back? Somebody has to probably click play on the demo because I don't have this thing. Perfect, thank you. So this is a deployment of Kubernetes for NSX. What we are going to see is we have a CLI screen where we are going to create a Redis backend. We are going to look at the YAML file for this Redis backend, where you can see we have a Redis master, Redis slave configuration for all the Kubernetes pods, right? This is purely an app owner or a developer's environment, right? This is how they define it. And within that, there are application names and tags which are very well defined. We don't have to do anything with this. The application owner would not even know that NSX is running. Using Kubernetes, we simply go and apply this backend, and now next thing we are going to go is go and deploy those Redis backend pods. Here the containers are being created. We are going to create 3 containers. Now we are going to switch to the NSX UI. This is NSXT, so it looks different than the NSX for vSphere UI, where we can do some keyword searches. We are going to search for Redis, and automatically all the logical ports. So whenever a pod was deployed, it automatically got hooked up to a logical switch, a VXLAN network, or an overlay network onto NSX. You have all of these connections, logical routers, everything which was automatically created for you. The reason why we did this was because we use a container network interface plugin, a native CNI plugin. We are going to do a Django front end, which is the web front end for this. Same idea. Automatically, what's happening under the hoods is NSX has built a CNI plugin, as I mentioned, for Kubernetes. So whenever Kubernetes deploys something, we can actually get those alerts and create the networks and auto-plumb those pods to the right logical network based on this. And now the security policy and everything can be based on those app names and tags and things in this. Here we are deploying the Django front end. Same thing. You're going to switch back, search for Django. And all of these different constructs which were automatically created while you're looking at this demo are seen. Your logical ports, you should see 4 logical ports for the 4 pods which were deployed. And we're going to run this. You can see the host name, IP address, everything has been created. We are going to go to that particular URL. And obviously, as you can see, everything should just work. And you can now, most importantly, see the container's private IP address. You're not sitting behind a NATed interface where everything is not visible. You can do things such as span and get counters and all kinds of things right down to the container level. You can apply firewall rules right down to the container level. So this is a very powerful functionality. And all of this will be available in the next few weeks or so. So this is very interesting. If you have time, go check out some of this functionality at the show. So what NSX enables for us is literally a big step forward, right? You can basically, people are going to have to start looking at breaking down those traditional silos where you can start working better cross-functionally. Simple example from the last demo, and I kept it last for a reason. An app developer can go deploy his application, use the right names, and those right names, if they just shared on how that is going to look like, could actually drive a lot of automation around networking and security. If they speak to each other, you can actually make processes which are much more automated, right? Think about the demos we showed you around the security rule creation, day 2 management of those security, right? You can actually automate a lot of these tasks. You can change the process. And while you can take people and process together, you can fundamentally change how IT can become more agile. You can change the culture of their organization, right? The net result, if you're able to adopt this the right way, you can actually have a transformational impact to business itself, right? So that's what we want you to walk away with from what NSX looks like. So applications are software, your network should be too. If you're able to do that, you can transform what applications and what you can do for your applications, right? And it is very easy to get started here, but the results will be significant as you look at over time. So thank you very much for your time. There's a lot more you can go to learn about NSX. We still have a couple of minutes. If there is 1 or 2 questions, we're happy to take it. You can meet us outside. We didn't mention the goodie bags. We have some goodie bags as well for those who come by to ask some questions. Thank you.